we're going to talk about testing. Do you all, okay, if you're my age, you probably took the SAT or the ACT when you applied to college, maybe both, because you wanted all your options open. In Florida, under Republican rule, they are now trying to push another type of standardized test that specifically caters to conservative Christians. I don't make the acronym here. I just want to point that out because this is the name of the test. I know what you're thinking, but we're all going to call it the cult test to make it easier. This is the classic learning test, the cult test. And basically, in Florida, it's not just an option. Florida's really pushing hard for students to take this. And the Florida Public University system, which covers the University of Florida and Florida State University, two of the biggest schools in the state, they are now saying we will accept your cult test scores instead of the SAT or ACT if you want to take it. Yes, I see those comments. That is if the students can find it. That is if any of these people can find it. Ha ha ha. We'll get it out of our system. Okay, so here's the thing. If you're trying to take a standardized test, I'm fully on the side of we shouldn't do standardized tests whatsoever. I think in California, their public education system said, we're not asking you to submit your SAT or ACT scores. It's optional, but you don't even have to do it. You can just apply and we will look at your recommendation letters. We will look at your GPA, your extracurricular activities. Thank you so much, Alma, for that super chat. I appreciate it. But yeah, they're not even taking standardized tests. That's the way to go because I think there's a lot of biases involved. And the whole point of standardized tests is that you can game the system. You, as the Varsity Blues scandals show, like you can, even if you don't cheat your way into the system, you can take test prep classes to learn how to score higher. It has nothing to do with how good you are in class. So I don't like standardized tests. But this whole thing, this push to get the cult test accepted, it's part of a larger push by Ron DeSantis to basically harm public education any way he can, or to diminish what we think of when we think of public education. Just to remind people who don't follow Florida politics, DeSantis and his Republican allies, they have already used their power to ban textbooks that they called too woke. They want to put more guns in more schools. They criticized AP African American studies, because it made white people feel bad. They made it easier for people to censor any kind of books in school. They have called for the end of tenure in higher education. And their allies conducted what some people called a hostile takeover of one particular college that Republicans deemed too progressive. And they basically decimated that place. And so this is their latest gambit, which is to get this cult test accepted. And I'll tell you about the cult test in just a second, but just to give you some numbers here. The SAT in 2022, last year, 1.7 million students took the SAT. 1.3 million students took the ACT. How many people took the CLT? Well, since 2015, in 7+ years, 21,000 kids have taken it. That's it. Not like last year. I mean, in the past 7 years, it's been a few thousand kids have taken it. 85% of them are white. 99% of them either attend private schools or charter schools, or they are homeschooled. The point is, the CLT doesn't have some big track record. There's not a lot of data that people can analyze to see if it's a worthwhile test or a worthwhile assessment to see if you're ready for college and if you know the stuff you ought to know before you start college. That's why they shouldn't be using it. Earlier this week, when they were deciding this, though, one of the people on the board of governors of the Florida university system basically voted against their using the CLT. And her basic argument is there's just no information on whether this test is useful. She said, I am not against allowing the use of the CLT. I oppose the use of it at this time because we do not have the empirical evidence to show that this assessment is of the same quality as the ACT and the SAT. So, like, that's the right answer. We just don't have enough information about this test to see if it's any good. So, what is this test? Why do conservative Christians like it so much? Why is it that the only schools before this week, the only schools that really accepted this test were like the conservative Christian colleges, like Hillsdale College in Michigan, and places like that? Well, let me tell you. Here's the thing about the classic learning test. When they say classic, they basically highlight the centrality of the Western tradition. That's what they say on their website, the centrality of the Western tradition, which is basically code for we really love dead white men, mostly Western Europeans, mostly Judeo Christians, and any sort of modern writing, the sort of thing kids might interact with these days. Any writing about race from like a modern perspective, out the window. We're not going to cover that. The ACT may cover that. The SAT may feature a passage from like Ta-Nehisi Coates or Isabel Wilkerson or someone, but not the CLT. No, no, no. We're going back to the 1700s, which is the only writing kids need to know about. One passage that they have on a sample test on their website, it featured a section from St. Teresa of Avila's The Way of Perfection, which is a religious piece of writing from centuries ago. And here's the thing, a religious passage like that might appear on the SAT because they have a really deep well of options because they don't limit where their writing passages come from. But the CLT emphasizes faith based works and whatever they think are the classics. Another problem with this is that when a writer for Mother Jones took a practice CLT test last month, they even pointed out how some of the questions could be answered correctly without even looking at the passage. Like, if you know, I can get rid of the obvious wrong answer, and there's only like a couple maybe answers left, and one of them is clearly not the direction they want me to go, you could, logic your way into the right answer without actually knowing anything. You know what I mean? So that was a problem with the test. Another problem is that some of the questions were so pointlessly easy that what are you even testing them on anymore? Here's another thing, the College Board itself. The College Board, by the way, oversees AP classes and AP tests, and they also oversee the SATs. So they have a vested interest in preserving their brand, but they also said when they reviewed a published CLT test, they found that 25% of the questions were below high school level. So they didn't test statistics, for example. And the SAT, on the other hand, is aligned to high school grade levels represented in state standards. So it's like you're not even quizzing them on the stuff they ought to know in high school. So, for all these reasons, you shouldn't really be taking the CLT test seriously. But in Florida, they're elevating this test to pretend that it's just as good. And there's no reason to think it's that good. And I think part of me is thinking like, come on, I took the SAT and ACT. I could not for the life of me tell you what passages I read because who cares? I read it, I answered my questions, I moved on. It didn't leave a mark on me. So who cares if there are religious passages on this exam, especially if the questions have nothing to do with religion per se. And here's the thing, here's the secret that you need to think about. If the CLT is accepted into Florida universities, and it's the school that a lot of academically gifted students want to go to because they're going to stay in state, how do you think their teachers are going to help them prepare to take these standardized tests? When I was in school, my teachers on certain days, we would do a practice section of the SAT or the ACT. In English class, we would do practice passages and try to answer the questions. What do you think they're going to do when it comes to the CLT? The way you help students prepare for an exam that has a lot of faith-based essays is you give students a lot of religious material that you can then ask them questions about. That's what this is really about. It's another way to shove religion into public schools without explicitly saying you are trying to shove religion into public schools. That's the problem with this. That's why they are doing this. It's not that the CLT directly promotes religion, but it indirectly sends the message that understanding religious writing can be beneficial. And for now, it limits the options of where high school students who take the exam can go, since The good colleges, at least outside of Florida, don't really take this test seriously. I should also point out, in Florida, they offer a scholarship called the Bright Future Scholarship Program. Basically, if you're one of the top students academically in your high school, you can apply for this scholarship. And if you promise to stay at a Florida college and you're going to go to a Florida university, a good chunk of your tuition could be paid off. Well, in order to apply for that benefit and in order to apply for that scholarship, Florida lawmakers earlier this year voted to say, yeah, we'll accept the cult test for that too. And only 3 lawmakers in the House voted against it. One of them was State Representative Anna Escamani, who's fantastic, but she pointed out, this is her comment, it's politically motivated to insert religion into our public institutions. As a firm believer of church-state separation, I don't think it's appropriate for a religious test to be used when it comes to our public universities. And that, I think, is exactly how anyone should be thinking about it. By the way, one more piece of evidence that the CLT shouldn't be taken that seriously. The director of marketing for the exam, she talked about, like, you guys, why are you all mad at us about this exam? There's no political motivation on it. And here's what she said, quote, students will be reading authors that are both atheist and religious. They'll be reading Karl Marx as well as Adam Smith. Her example of the atheist that kids would be reading is Karl Marx, the communist. She's trying to link those two things as if atheism and communism are just one and the same thing. You know what I mean? Just a messed up thing. Look, if Florida says here's the other problem. If Florida says the cult test can be used in admissions for Florida colleges, you know how other red states are going to react. They're going to start doing the exact same thing. They're going to say, oh, well, in our universities where we have a legislature that can do this, we're going to start accepting it too. And if the colleges say no, we'll just appoint our cronies to their board of trustees. Like, all these red states are so desperate to approve anything that grants more legitimacy to religious writing and conservative thought. And just going back to what I said earlier, I wish more colleges would just get rid of standardized testing altogether and not take it seriously at all. But if they are going to take the SAT and ACT scores, and if students are planning to take those tests, then they really shouldn't be taking this bad Christian movie, Christian music version. It's always like a crappy version of the real thing. Like, you know how God's Not Dead is a crappy version of a good movie and Christian music is a crappy version of real music? Well, the CLT is a crappy version of the SAT and ACT. And again, those tests, as with their flaws, they are battle tested. They are well known. There's been studies on them for years. We know what that devil looks like. Very few people know what the CLT looks like, which is the problem. I'll stop there. If there's any other private chats or comments, feel free to put them up on here. From Ja, I assume the folks who own the CLT tests are donors or something. Seems like a financial decision, not necessarily a weird religious one. So, interesting thing. The CLT, if you go to the website, you could see their like board of advisors, and it is a mix of just a wild group of people. It's a bunch of conservative Christian college leaders. You have conservative activists like Christopher Rufo. You have Cornel West, that the third party Green Party candidate for president who's trying to give votes to Donald Trump. I don't know why. But you have that mix of just right-wing people. And you can almost certainly bet there are right-wing groups trying to push for this test to be accepted in more places because it takes down the College Board a peg. Because again, they run the SAT. So yeah, I don't really have in front of me the name of any group that's donating to it, but it wouldn't surprise me if that was the case.